The Keeper's Last Log. My Uncle Gerald was a lighthouse keeper for over 25 years. He passed away in 2011, but growing up, I'd spend hours listening to his stories about storms, rescues, and ocean life. He wasn't the type to exaggerate or chase drama. In fact, he was known for his calm, stoic personality. But there was one story he only told me once, right before he died. It was the last time we spoke, and to this day, it still haunts me. He said it happened in the winter of 1992 at Blackstone Point Lighthouse off the coast of Oregon. Back then, the light was still manned year-round. Gerald had volunteered for a solo rotation over Christmas so that another keeper could spend time with his family. He never minded being alone. He said the isolation suited him. Blackstone was a squat 3-story lighthouse built on a jagged basalt outcrop, accessible only by a steep metal walkway from the mainland cliffs. Waves would slam the base so hard in winter that the glass would rattle all night. The interior was cramped, a tiny bunk room, a galley kitchen, and the spiral stairs leading to the beacon chamber. No plumbing, propane heaters only, no internet back then, of course, just radio contact with the harbor master once per day to confirm status. He said the first week was peaceful. He'd spend his days checking lamp oil reserves, repairing a corroded railing outside, and reading novels by lantern light at night. On the 8th evening, he noticed the temperature had dropped sharply. By midnight, freezing winds whipped around the tower so violently he could hear metal struts groaning under the strain. He decided to check the beacon before bed to make sure nothing had loosened. When he climbed the spiral stairs, he felt off. He described it like a buzzing in the air, the same sensation you get near a live electrical box, except there was no electrical hum, just that wind screaming past the glass dome overhead. He checked the lamp housing, the lenses, and the rotation gear. All were fine, but when he turned to descend, he froze. On the condensation-fogged glass of the inner lantern room window was a handprint. 5 long fingers, clearly visible in the thin film of moisture. It was too high up to have been his. Gerald was tall, nearly 6'3", but the handprint was at least a foot above where his tallest reach would be. He wiped it away with his coat sleeve, thinking maybe it was leftover residue from a worker before him, and tried to shake the feeling crawling up his back. He descended to the bunk room, locked the stair hatch, and tried to sleep. The next morning, his daily radio check-in failed. Static only. He tried for an hour with no luck. The storm had worsened. By midday, visibility had dropped to almost zero. Sea spray coated every window with a salty white film. He kept busy with maintenance logs, refusing to think about the handprint. That night, just after 1 a.m., he woke up to a loud thud. The entire tower shook. Thinking a rogue wave had smashed into the rocks, he grabbed his coat and ran up to the lantern room to check for cracks in the glass. Everything seemed intact, but then he saw it again. Another handprint. This time it was on the outside of the window. Impossible, he thought. The outer glass was smooth, vertical surface with no ledge. The wind howled so violently that if a person had somehow climbed up there, they'd have been blown into the sea. He pressed his palm to the glass beside it. The print outside was longer, narrower, with fingers ending in pointed tips like claws or broken nails. He said the sight made his heart pound so hard it hurt. He backed away, flicking off his lamp, and descended the stairs in the dark, refusing to look back at the silhouette of that print against the swirling snow. Beyond, he didn't sleep that night. Instead, he sat in the bunk room chair, propane heater hissing, lantern casting flickering shadows across the narrow room. At some point before dawn, he drifted into an uneasy half-sleep. That's when he heard it, a tapping, tap, 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 coming from the metal hatch to the beacon stairs. He sat up, heart slamming against his ribs, listening in the dark. The tapping stopped. Then something began scratching along the hatch's surface, a slow scraping sound like nails against sheet metal. He told me his body went rigid with fear. He waited until daylight before he moved. When dawn finally came, the scratching had stopped. He opened the hatch slowly, lamp held high, ready to see. He didn't know what, but there was nothing there. No marks, no sign anyone had ever touched it. That day, the radio came back online for a few seconds. Enough to hear the harbor master asking him to confirm his status. He shouted back that everything was fine, voice shaking, praying they hadn't heard the terror in his words. That evening, as dusk settled and the storm clouds boiled purple over the horizon, he wrote in the maintenance logbook, 12/23/1992, winds force 8, heavy freezing spray, beacon rotation normal, handprint reappeared, scratching at hatch last night, not sure if hallucinating due to isolation, must remain calm. He never told his supervisor about that entry. It remained in his personal notebook, which I found after his death. On Christmas Eve, the storm finally broke. At dawn, he climbed to the beacon room, determined to prove to himself there was a rational explanation. The rising sun burned through the mist, illuminating the ocean in brilliant gold. For the first time in days, he could see clearly to shore. That's when he noticed the rocks below the lighthouse base. Strewn along the slick black stone were dozens of small objects, pieces of driftwood. No. As he focused, he realized they were tiny wooden carvings, figurines each no larger than a finger, shaped like thin, distorted people with their hands raised to their faces in horror. He said there were at least 30 scattered across the rocks. The surf washed over them again and again, but they never drifted away, as if wedged between stone cracks intentionally. He didn't climb down to retrieve them. He simply went back inside, locked every hatch, and sat in silence until the relief boat arrived 2 days later. When he disembarked, the crew said he looked like he'd aged 10 years. His hair had gone half gray in that single rotation. He never volunteered for solo lighthouse duty again. Years later, as I sat by his hospice bed, he whispered, "Don't ever go to Blackstone alone. Some places, they aren't abandoned. They're just waiting." That was the last thing he ever said to me before he passed away that night. The keeper who stayed. This last story was told to me by a retired Coast Guard diver named Leon, a man in his 60s with hands like old rope and eyes that always seemed to be looking at something behind you rather than at you. I met him in 2019 while working as a contractor for a small dock repair job in Astoria. Over lunch breaks, he'd share maritime stories, near drownings, ghost nets, shipwreck recoveries, but one afternoon, when it was just the two of us eating sandwiches in silence, he asked me out of nowhere if I'd ever heard about Dead Man's Watchlight. I told him I hadn't. He just nodded and said, "Good, don't ever go there." After a long pause, he told me why. It was 1995. Leon was part of a 4-man dive team assigned to inspect the structural pylons beneath Dead Man's Watch Lighthouse. The place had been built in 1899 on a solitary spire of rock off the Washington coast, named after a clipper ship that wrecked there in 1872, drowning 47 men when the hull split open against the reef. The lighthouse itself was automated by then, but still required biannual maintenance and structural integrity checks below the waterline. Their job was supposed to be routine: dive at dawn during slack tide, check pylon corrosion and marine growth, document any cracking, then return to base. The keeper's quarters had been sealed off for decades. Only the automated lamp remained active. Their supervisor, a stout, grizzled man named Fitch, was waiting topside in the maintenance skiff while Leon and his partner Jerry geared up for the final dive of the day. The sea was glassy, no wind, and visibility underwater was surprisingly good. They descended along the barnacle-encrusted pylons, scraping samples into mesh bags, recording footage with a heavy underwater camcorder rig. Leon said he felt completely calm down there, weightless in the green twilight, until about 20 minutes into the dive. That's when Jerry radioed in through his headset mic. "Hey, do you see that?" Leon turned, expecting to see a shark or seal approaching. Instead, Jerry was pointing upward toward the metal staircase that descended from the lighthouse's lower platform into the water. The stairs were old, half-submerged, covered in algae and rust. Leon squinted, adjusting his dive light beam, and that's when he saw it. Someone was standing on the stairs. At first, he thought it was Fitch, but it wasn't. The figure was barefoot, wearing dark blue trousers and a white shirt soaked through, clinging to their chest. Their skin looked off like waxy driftwood. They just stood there waist-deep in the water, unmoving, staring straight ahead. Leon said his chest tightened so hard it hurt. Jerry radioed again, voice shaking. "What's he doing there? That guy, is he okay?" Leon didn't reply. He was too busy trying to process what he was seeing. The man's hair hung over his face in dark dripping strands, and as Leon swept his dive light upward, the figure's head twitched slightly, like a puppet jerked by a loose string. Then it stepped forward off the stairs into the water, but instead of splashing or sinking, it just dissolved. Water rippled outward where the feet should have broken the surface, but there was nothing left standing there. Just empty sea swirling with silt and algae particles. They both floated there in stunned silence for a moment before Jerry whispered, "We need to go up, now." They ascended quickly, breaching beside the skiff. Fitch hauled them aboard, confused by their shaking hands and darting eyes. They stammered out what they'd seen, but Fitch just shook his head and said, "Heard about that one before. You boys are fine. Dry off and help me pack up." On the ride back, Fitch finally explained. The lighthouse had been built after that 1872 wreck. One of the survivors had stayed behind as the first appointed keeper. His name was Thomas Henley, a young sailor, only 19 at the time. He was the sole survivor from his family aboard the ship. After the lighthouse was completed, he lived there alone for 12 years until one night he stopped responding to supply signals. When they finally sent a boat out to check, they found him hanging by a length of anchor rope from the beacon platform, soaked in seawater, barefoot, and dressed in his formal watch uniform, blue trousers, and a white shirt. The logbook recovered from inside was mostly mundane entries about lamp oil and weather until the final 3 pages. They were filled with a single repeated sentence scrawled over and over. "I must stay. I must stay. I must stay." The local harbor workers called him the keeper who stayed. Over the decades, divers and maintenance crews reported glimpses of a barefoot man standing silently on the submerged stairs, staring out to sea or watching them work from the corner of their vision. Jerry quit dive work the following month. Leon kept working until his retirement, but refused all assignments near Dead Man's Watch. When I asked if he thought it was real or just nitrogen narcosis playing tricks on their brains underwater, he shook his head and said something I'll never forget. "You can hallucinate all you want, son, but nitrogen doesn't leave wet footprints on steel stairs." I asked what he meant. He told me that after they surfaced, while Fitch was packing gear, Leon went to coil their dive lines at the base of the lighthouse ladder. The metal was slick with algae and cold spray, but along the upper 3 rungs he found bare footprints. Fresh, water dripping from the rusted treads onto the surface below. No shoes, no boots, just human feet. When he looked up at the empty stairs leading to the sealed keeper's door, he said it felt like the entire tower was bending inward, like it was breathing around him. He grabbed his coil and ran back to the skiff, refusing to look back. That was the only time I ever saw Leon's hands tremble while he spoke. He took a deep breath, finished his sandwich, and ended the story with a simple, quiet sentence. "Lighthouses are built to guide ships through darkness, but some darkness can't be guided away.